We are not anti-West. We are pro-Africa. We do not seek war. We demand respect. And let this be heard in every capital. Africa will no longer ask for permission to exist. From the deserts of Mali to the rivers of Niger, from the forests of Congo to the gold fields of Ghana, we are uniting not under flags of former masters, but under the banner of African dignity. We will feed our children with our own hands. We will defend our borders with our own armies. We will build our roads, teach our history, and write our future.
Eat.
But the true chains, the ones harder to break, are not on our wrists. They are in our minds. We've been taught to believe the white men must lead, that without them we cannot govern, that progress must be imported, that self-reliance is too risky. I say no. Our ancestors ruled before they came. We built empires while they were still in caves. We wrote mathematics while they feared fire. It is not us who must catch up. It is they who must finally reckon with the truth. A call to African leaders. To my fellow African leaders who still kneel. Rise. History will not be kind to those who traded their people for power. No more silence. No more cowardice. If you are afraid to lead your people to freedom, then step aside. We will do it without you. I do not seek to be a ruler. I seek to be a servant of liberation. Welcoming new alliances system. Let them say Russia is here. Let them panic. Let them scream about influence. But where were they when our people were dying? Where were they when terrorism consumed our villages? Where were they when every loan came with a chain around our necks? Now that we stand with those who treat us as equals, suddenly they remember us. A long pause. Then a low chant begins to rise. No more chains. No more chains. A new direction system. The future will not be written in Brussels. It will not be dictated in Washington. It will not be sold in Paris. It will be written here, in Africa, by Africans, for Africans, with Africans. Asterisk. Asterisk. Let our enemies tremble. Let our children hope. Let history record that we were the generation that refused to kneel. My brothers and sisters of Burkina Faso, my brothers and sisters across Africa, today we speak not as beggars, not as colonies, not as shadows beneath foreign boots, but as sons and daughters of a continent that has bled enough, that has bowed enough, that has obeyed enough. Today Africa rises. For over a century we were told we were free. But what is freedom when our uranium lights up Paris, but our own children sleep in darkness? What is freedom when our gold builds foreign reserves, but our people sell tomatoes on the roadside just to survive? They drew our borders with rulers and rifles. They stole our resources and fed us slogans. They replaced chains with contracts and called it development. They trained our leaders to betray us in expensive universities, taught them to kneel, and to teach us to kneel too. Today, I say enough. Burkina Faso will no longer export suffering and import silence. We will no longer sign death disguised as diplomacy. We will no longer let those who never cared about our lives dictate how we live. The imperialists have changed their masks, but not their mission. They come today not with whips and chains, but with military bases and corrupt loans. They promise security and bring chaos. They promise aid and extract everything. They call it partnership, but we all know it's plunder. For more than 8 years we have faced the most barbaric, the most violent form of imperialist neo-colonialism. Slavery continues to impose itself on us. But this generation is not afraid to fight back. We are not anti-West. We are pro-Africa. We do not seek war. We demand respect. And let this be heard in every capital. Africa will no longer ask for permission to exist. From the deserts of Mali to the rivers of Niger, from the forests of Congo to the gold fields of Ghana, we are uniting not under flags of former masters, but under the banner of African dignity.
According to the streets of Ouagadougou that day, something historic was unfolding, but it wasn't just a speech. It was a rupture. A political earthquake. A warning shot, not just to the colonial powers, but to any African leader still hiding behind foreign suits and imported ideologies. They say Captain Ibrahim Traore wasn't reading from a script. He was speaking straight from the wound. For decades, Africa has been managed like a business, with outside shareholders. They took the gold. They took the uranium. And when we asked for dignity, they offered debt. Burkina Faso, like much of West Africa, had followed the so-called development path prescribed by former colonial powers. But as Traoré stood at that podium, he wasn't just delivering policy. He was delivering pain, the kind passed from one generation to the next. And that's where the story turns. Because this wasn't a spontaneous outburst. It was a declaration. A manifesto disguised as a speech. And in it, Captain Ibrahim Traoré made three things clear. First, the age of begging is over. Africa will no longer ask for what already belongs to it: sovereignty, wealth, respect. Second, security built on foreign boots is no security at all. From Mali to Burkina Faso to Niger, foreign military presence had only deepened instability. It wasn't solving the problem. It was the problem. And third, those who refuse to lead Africa forward will be left behind. The speech wasn't broadcast on every news channel, but it was heard in every capital that had once held Africa by the throat. Inside the speech was a charge: they come with peace treaties and warplanes. They speak of democracy, but fund dictators. They offer security, but destabilize entire regions. That's not rhetoric. That's experience. According to those close to the leadership, Traoré didn't write that speech in a vacuum. It came after months of intelligence briefings. Reports of arms flowing through foreign-backed networks. Maps showing where terrorist groups operated, and who was arming them. The irony wasn't lost on the people. How could nations that claim to fight terrorism also profit from it? Traoré's words were chosen carefully, not to provoke, but to expose. For 8 years, he said, we've watched our villages burn, our schools close, our children buried. And every time we asked for help, they sent lectures. Every time we rose to defend ourselves, they called it rebellion. But what do you call it, when a people finally says no? This wasn't just about Burkina Faso. This was a mirror for the entire continent. Because whether it's cobalt from the Congo or oil from Nigeria, the pattern is the same: Africa produces. The West profits. The people suffer. And now, the silence is broken. In the crowd that day were elders who remembered Sankara. Young people born into drone warfare and internet blackouts. Farmers who hadn't seen a fair harvest price in years. All of them, from different walks of life, heard the same thing: this is our line in the sand. No more backdoor deals. No more debt disguised as development. No more foreign bases disguised as protection. What Captain Ibrahim Traoré said next sent tremors through the diplomatic world: Africa does not need saviors. Africa needs its sons and daughters to wake up. He didn't name names. He didn't have to. Everyone knew which governments he was talking about. Everyone knew who had built empires off African blood. But perhaps the most powerful moment came when he looked past the cameras and said, "We do not hate the West. But we will no longer obey it." For a region long treated as a pawn in global power plays, this wasn't just bold, it was unprecedented. Burkina Faso wasn't declaring war. It was declaring independence, again. But this time, for real. And that's when the whispers began. That this kind of speech was dangerous. That this kind of truth was a threat. Not to the people. Not to the region. But to the system that had profited from Africa's silence. According to senior sources, within 48 hours of that speech, several Western embassies requested transcripts. Some even issued internal warnings, calling the address a potential catalyst for anti-foreign sentiment. But they misunderstood the moment. This wasn't about hate. It was about history. It was about reclaiming a narrative written without African voices. And then came the shift. Mali echoed the message. Niger reinforced it. AES was no longer a quiet bloc, it had become the loudest voice in Africa. The people weren't just listening. They were rising. But revolutions, even peaceful ones, are rarely welcomed. And as Captain Traoré descended from that podium, flanked by security, surrounded by cheers, intelligence agencies abroad began redrawing their files. A young soldier in fatigues had just made enemies of billion-dollar interests. And that is where the next chapter begins. Because while the speech electrified the people, it also triggered plans in boardrooms and bunkers far away. They began asking the question Traoré had prepared for all along: what if Africa stops obeying? According to European intelligence circles, Traoré's speech didn't go unnoticed, it triggered alarms. In Paris, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs scrambled for talking points. In Washington, analysts requested real-time satellite data on Ouagadougou. And in Abidjan, whispers moved faster than gunfire, because the old playbook was being reopened. But this time, the target wasn't a terrorist. It was a soldier who dared to speak. And his weapon was the truth. Sources close to regional diplomats confirmed that by the next morning, Western envoys were already coordinating containment strategies. Not for terrorism, but for ideas. Because Traoré hadn't just called out the empire, he had named the chains. And when people name the chains, they tend to break them. Behind the closed doors of international security councils, the narrative began to shift. Suddenly, the man hailed by his people as a liberator, was being labeled a destabilizing force. They said his rhetoric could ignite rebellion. They said he was aligning with adversarial states. They didn't say the word Russia. Not yet. But everyone in the room was already thinking it. A strategic pivot according to military analysts, AES, the alliance of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, was never just about security. It was about sovereignty. A strategic pivot. A move away from dependency. A step toward something dangerously African. But that pivot needed a partner. One with weapons. One with infrastructure. One unafraid to challenge the West. Enter Russia. The West called it infiltration. Burkina Faso called it partnership. Russia called it non-interference. And in the streets of Bamako, Niamey, and Ouagadougou, the people called it hope. Because while others had sent aid with strings, Russia sent trucks. While others had built bases, Russia trained soldiers on local soil. While others demanded reform, Russia demanded respect. To Traoré, it wasn't about choosing East over West. It was about choosing dignity over dependence. Inside the new playbook, according to classified diplomatic cables leaked weeks later, France had grown increasingly anxious about the collapse of influence across Francophone Africa. What they once called a sphere of influence was now being called an occupation by the people. And where influence collapses, retaliation begins. There were whispers of pressure on ECOWAS. Talk of sanctions. Economic punishments. Even covert destabilization operations. The gloves were coming off. Because they realized something chilling: this wasn't a phase. This was a movement. From regional economic threats to foreign press campaigns labeling Traoré a populist strongman, the machine began to spin. One article from a European think tank warned, if this wave is not controlled, it could spread across the entire continent, jeopardizing decades of geopolitical structure. But what they called structure, Traoré had already called slavery in disguise. The people doubled down. Even with growing pressure, the Burkinabe people were unmoved. Why? Because for the first time in decades, they saw a leader who didn't speak to embassies, he spoke to them. When Traoré walked the streets without fear, they saw courage. When he rejected IMF conditions, they saw freedom. When he said, "We do not hate the West, but we will no longer obey it," they knew the winds had changed. In Niamey, students held up signs that read, "This is not about alliances. This is about Africans finally choosing themselves." In Mali, radio hosts debated openly what Sankara would say today. And in villages once used as drone playgrounds, farmers simply said, "If Traoré is the storm, then let it rain." Global tremors, but storms don't respect borders. And Traoré's voice, powered by social media, encrypted apps, and grassroots networks, was now echoing far beyond Burkina Faso. In South Africa, young activists quoted him. In Kenya, Pan-African podcasts dissected his words. In Haiti, protesters painted murals of him next to Thomas Sankara. Even in the Caribbean, there was murmuring. The colonial world order, the one held together by soft power and harder silence, was cracking. According to UN intelligence briefings, several African leaders were privately warned, do not endorse Traoré publicly. The repercussions could be severe. But in private rooms, more and more heads of state were listening. Some quietly. Others with envy. Because Traoré hadn't just challenged the system. He had survived it, and gained popularity for doing so. The countermove, but every action has a reaction. And in the shadows, retaliation was already in motion. Whispers of sabotage. Cyber attacks on AES communication systems. Foreign-funded opposition groups reactivated. According to insiders, intercepted communications revealed references to neutralizing the AES project before it becomes irreversible. Neutralizing didn't always mean killing a man. Sometimes it meant discrediting him. Undermining trust. Triggering chaos from within. But sometimes it meant more. And so the question began circulating among close allies of the Burkinabe government. What happens if they can't stop him with words? It wasn't paranoia. History had taught Africa too well what happens to those who dare break the cycle. Lumumba. Sankara. Gaddafi. The message has always been the same, challenge the empire, and you pay the price. But Ibrahim Traoré had already prepared for that. He had said it months before, they may kill the man, but they will not kill the awakening. And this is where the tension reaches its peak. Because now the world isn't just watching Traoré. It's watching who will stand with him. And who will try to take him down. According to the government of Burkina Faso, the plot to silence Captain Ibrahim Traoré wasn't just an internal power struggle. It was a foreign operation, a coordinated move designed to fracture the AES alliance before it could reshape the region. On paper, it was called Operation Rebalance. Off the record, it was something darker. A strategy to eliminate what they now saw as the single greatest threat to neo-colonial stability in West Africa, a young revolutionary with a platform, and a plan. Burkina Faso's counterintelligence services were the first to uncover it. Encrypted messages. Unusual fund transfers. Movement of operatives between border towns. And then, an intercepted audio file. One line stood out, he must be gone before the next summit. We can't afford a united front at the regional level. The voice wasn't identified. But the location was, Abidjan, Ivory Coast. According to multiple security officials, the plan relied on three key components: discredit Traoré, publicly destabilize the military from within, remove the leader, either by force or by fracture. The disinformation campaign started first. Foreign-owned media outlets began circulating stories claiming widespread dissatisfaction inside Burkina Faso's armed forces. Anonymous quotes. Unverified surveys. Rumors of mutiny. But inside the barracks, the truth was different. Morale was high. The soldiers weren't turning against Traoré, they were watching his back. Because they knew something was coming. Then came the movement of mercenaries, quiet, methodical, just below radar. Small arms caches discovered in the south. Strange foreign passports in the hands of arrested smugglers. Phone calls between former military officials and unknown foreign contacts. The aim was clear. Create an environment of chaos. If Traoré couldn't be removed politically, then he would be removed physically. According to sources within Mali's intelligence unit, the same tactics had been observed before, in Libya, in the Congo, in Guinea-Bissau. Create unrest. Blame the leadership. Justify foreign intervention. Replace the government. It was a pattern. A neo-colonial playbook. With new names, but the same result. And that's where France entered the conversation, again. French officials publicly denied any involvement. But behind closed doors, the connection was harder to ignore. Several of the encrypted communications were traced back to intelligence hubs previously used by French operations in the Sahel. One message stood out: our influence must not erode in this zone. Not now. Not ever. To Traoré, the message was loud and clear: this was never about democracy. It was always about control. According to high-level Burkinabe sources, the government of Ivory Coast had become a staging ground, willingly or not, for a larger agenda. Military defectors with financial ties to foreign contractors. Dissidents being quietly flown out and briefed. A transitional council, rumored to be waiting in the wings if the assassination succeeded. It wasn't just a threat. It was a soft invasion. One bullet away from regime change. But Traoré didn't flinch. Instead, he did something no one expected: he exposed the plot, before it could be executed. In a national broadcast, he stood before the people and said, "We know what you are planning. You can assassinate a man, but you cannot assassinate a movement. Burkina Faso will never return to the chains, not in secret, not in silence." The air shifted after that. Because the people didn't panic. They prepared. Neighborhoods began organizing civilian watches. The military ramped up internal checks. All AES governments tightened border surveillance. And in Russia, according to insiders, the message was simple: the line has been crossed. We stand ready. The world didn't see missiles. It didn't see headlines. But something had changed. AES intelligence began merging its systems. Joint security drills were initiated across Ouagadougou, Bamako, and Niamey. For the first time, an assassination plot wasn't just about one country. It was about a united resistance, refusing to fall. Inside foreign embassies, reports were now coming in labeled with new urgency: AES may be more coordinated than previously assessed. Public sentiment is unmoved by international pressure. Russian advisors increasing presence, plausible military pact incoming. And then came the moment that shocked everyone. Captain Ibrahim Traoré announced a continental address, not just for Burkina Faso, but for the whole of Africa. He called on the leaders of the AES, Guinea, and even observers in Tanzania, Ethiopia, and Algeria. It was time, he said, to stop reacting. And start building. The planned speech would announce a revolutionary framework, a new African Security Charter, an economic independence accord, and, most controversial of all, an African military technology network, partially backed by Russia and China. It wasn't a pivot. It was a break. And every foreign power knew it. According to leaked NATO briefings, the concern was no longer just Burkina Faso. It was the Traoré effect. A theory that once one African nation fully breaks free, and succeeds, others will follow. It wasn't bullets that scared them. It was the example. And so the question now sits on every desk in every embassy watching the Sahel: can he be stopped in time? Or is it already too late? Because what started as a speech has become a movement. And what was once dismissed as populism is now continental strategy. Traoré knows the cost. He's seen the assassinations. He's read the names in Africa's graveyard of heroes. But he also knows one thing more: this time, the people aren't mourning. They're marching.